Okay, it's January 18th, 2022, 7:30 PM. Going to call the Planning and Zoning meeting to order. Members present, Doug Roberts, John Tehan, and Rebecca Sanowski. You see anybody else that I missed, Mike?
Doug, Becky, John, you. I think that's it.
Yeah, I think so too. Okay, so item D tonight, public hearing. So we're going to open the public hearing, APZ 21-24, special permit for signage at Love's Travel Stop, 3 Polster Road, applicant Becky Torrenson, owner, Love's Travel Stop and Country Stores Incorporated.
So at the request of the applicant, we're going to continue this to the next meeting. There was a scheduling conflict, so she wasn't able to be here. So if you guys could just make a motion to continue the public hearing to the next meeting, we can hear from her then.
So moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that one was easy.
For now.
All right, let's see, item E, new business, a affordable housing plan, survey results and demographic review.
So this is an item that's been popping up, obviously as we move through the process. As you know, we kind of started, and a couple of meetings ago, we reviewed with the commission the survey questions. So the survey went live. We advertised it a couple of different places online. I gave hard copies to the senior center director so that people that didn't have access to the computer could fill out paper versions. We advertised it on Facebook. And have been sort of monitoring the survey questions and results coming in. So we actually kind of did the demographic review. So what we're going to go over today are the survey results. So what are people saying? And Rachel's going to explain that part. And then afterward, I'm going to kind of go through our first review of the regs. What we do as part of this is a regulatory analysis to kind of see where the zoning regulations, whether it be policies or procedures, may not be supportive of these types of things. So I'm going to hand it over to Rachel, and then we'll.
I have a question first. How many surveys came back? How many were sent out? How many came back?
There are 89 responses.
So 89 out of a town of 5,000 people.
Yeah, it was
That's
not
pathetic.
a fantastic turnout.
We the numbers are pretty consistent across the board with what a lot of towns get for engagement. There are towns like Mansfield which spent the money to do direct mailings, so they got a significant response.
Yeah.
But they did a paper mailing to every single household.
89 surveys with a town of like this many people. That's not statistically significant.
No,
It's just not.
I would agree. We definitely kept the survey open longer because there was some concern that with everything related to COVID and people looking online for COVID testing sites, and if the town was distributing masks and other things, we were worried it was going to get buried. So we did some follow-up posts, trying to boost that engagement. But we just didn't have much. I don't know that if it's related to the topic or what.
I'm going to share my.
Yeah. And so, I mean, if you guys are have any thoughts about how else we can get the word out, other than the methods that we've tried to make use of, we're more than happy to try to make sure that people have the opportunity to provide feedback. But we kind of exhausted the options that we had access to.
It's just frustrating. Like, at some point, like when people realize, like, what this is about. Oh, I never heard about that. We'll hear those kind of comments and everything. Why didn't you send something out? That's what they'll say.
Yeah, it's certainly frustrating, and I would say not unique to Willington. A lot of people are only engaged when there's a specific item or topic that they are either really, really happy about or really, really unhappy about. It's definitely a challenge. But let's give you a sense of what the survey results say. And, you know, maybe at least what we have are really, really good.
I need you to enable screen sharing,
Oh.
Mike.
Yep. 1 second. Okay, go for it.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to run through the survey results real quick. So we're right up to, I don't know, like this is kind of like 3/4 of the way through, or maybe halfway through the plan. What would you say, Mike?
Yeah, we've finished up all the front end stuff. We've looked at the demographics. We've kind of figured out what the plan's going to include. We have done the, you know, the survey and tried to engage with folks. So now we've got to kind of put those pieces together and figure out what it's saying.
Yeah, we're like in a good place here with our progress. So in terms of who answered the survey, as I said, there is almost 90 respondents. About 90% said that they live in Willington, while the remaining live and work in town. Looking at ownership, about 85% own their own homes, 10% rent their homes, and 5% preferred not to answer. On the top graph, you can see kind of the breakdown of household incomes in terms of the respondents. So most people fell within 50,000 to 200,000 for their annual household income, but also a large chunk chose not to answer. In terms of age, it was mostly people 35 and older. And of the 90 respondents, about a third gave us their emails for future communications.
So that, you know, I would just want to jump in. So we can take those emails, and as we move through the process, and if we decide, you know, to have a hearing on the final plan, and, you know, or we have any follow-up engagement or whatever, I mean, we can certainly, you know, granted it's not a ton of people, but we'll certainly take that information and use that for any future engagement that, you know, is involved with this, or as we work through implementation, because at least a third of those folks are interested in the topic.
Yeah, it's like a group of like 30 people, so it's a good amount of people. Spotify is like giving me a pop-up.
Looked okay on our end.
I couldn't see the text on mine. Okay, I have it now. So the second question was, do you think the housing options currently available in Willington fit existing residents' needs? Most people said yes, and then the remaining were split between no and unsure. In terms of like if the housing stock fits future residents' needs, again, most people said yes, but it wasn't a very clear, way more people said yes than no thing. And there was a good chunk of people who were unsure if housing stock in Willington is adequate to satisfy future residents. Do you think affordable housing is an important component of Willington's longevity? Again, pretty split between yes and no. Some people were unsure. So these kind of couple questions gauged people's opinions on the importance of housing options and just in general on housing in Willington. What do you consider to be affordable or attainable in Willington? This was just selecting one, and most people agreed that housing over $1,500 a month was unreasonable. Are you concerned with the overall cost of housing or home ownership in Willington? Kind of a split between yes and no, more people saying no. do you think increasing housing options in Willington would improve the town, negatively impact the town, or not have much effect on the town? Again, a pretty good split between people who said that housing would improve the town and negatively impact the town. Next question is, in Willington, for whom do you think housing units are most needed? And this one, they selected their top two. Most people said that both young families and seniors are the biggest groups who need housing, which makes sense, reflecting like overall demographics in Willington, that they would choose these two groups. And then, you know, some people said young professionals, as well as not really thinking that we need more housing options. In this question, people ranked what types of affordable housing is most needed in Willington. Most people said single family detached homes. And then as you go down the list, it pretty much just got less and less popular. And I can also forward this all along, so if people want to read more in
Yeah,
depth, they can.
I'd like to have a copy of this.
Yeah, I can also fully print out, but it's probably easier if I fully print out the Survey Monkey, because then you can see everything.
Yeah, we can, I can share, we can create a page on the website and I can share all this stuff so everybody can look at it, and then we can send it to the commission too.
Good idea. So this question was open-ended, so respondents could put in whatever they thought for which areas of town they thought best suited additional housing units. So like kind of hard to quantify, but from what I saw, a lot of people were saying along major routes like Route 32, 74, north of I-84 towards Stafford Springs, Route 44 because of the access to Yukon. Some people said South Willington. A handful of people were talking about Phelps Plaza, Phelps Crossing area, River Road, buildings near town offices, West Willington, Village Hill Road, and near Town Green. And this one, people were ranking the following potential obstacles to development of more housing opportunities in Willington. Most people said local attitudes opposed to more housing and public resistance in general to the idea. A lot of people also named environmental constraints like wetlands, floodplains, etc., as well as the cost of land and the construction. But pretty spread among these obstacles. Okay, so that's it for the survey. I don't know if anyone has any questions or comments, reactions.
If I could just kind of, my takeaway, you know, is a couple of things. The fact that we don't have any real polarizing data, the fact that you know, you may look at this and say, well, the survey's not really saying much, but the fact that it's not saying something does tell us something. You know, we don't have very polarizing issues. We don't have certain sections of this survey where the bars are jumping off the page. And so that means that everybody's not falling into one bucket across the board. And so with that, coupled with the fact that on one hand, most people agree that housing affordability is important, right? The data in one of the earlier questions showed that they agree that the housing cost is an important component of, you know, Willington's viability. But then also a lot of the respondents felt that increases in affordable housing would negatively impact the town. To me, what that says is there's a little bit of an educational component that needs to happen here. A lot of people don't perhaps fully understand what affordable housing can be. You know, it's not that everybody's just saying we don't want it anywhere. It doesn't matter. It's not important. We don't need it. We don't want it. That's not what this is saying. You know, I also think that Willington being a community that is more affordable in many ways, if you look at the surrounding towns and what people are going to pay compared to Willington, housing cost is perhaps not on folks' mind as much as it might be in a neighboring community that have seen taxes increase year after year after year after year of significant numbers. So those are, not necessarily bad things, but there are some things that we can pull from this, and we can adjust these. Even this graph that we're looking at now, I mean, the first thing was local attitudes, right? Again, that's education. That's us making sure that people understand what this involves, what these projects look like, the fact that we already have these things in Willington. And then the second one is zoning regulations, right? We can control both of those. And so if we make progress on both of those components, you can shift the weight into other things. So even though, we don't have as much engagement as we'd want, and, we're feeling like we wish more folks had given us, their feelings, there's still a lot that can be taken away from these responses. I think
Hey,
you're gonna,
Mike,
Yeah.
sorry.
no, go for it, John.
One thing that I never did ask, and I thought I should have, what effect does the crumbling foundations have on our affordable housing stock? I mean, I know a lot of homes have that problem. They've had their assessments and appraisals reduced as a result. Does that enter into this equation at all as far as, home value is concerned?
So we're not really, when we look at what is affordable, we're looking at income, not direct. It's not directly tied. So when we would say an affordable housing unit is, deed restricted at 30% of the 80% of area median income, it sort of sets aside the housing cost. It's an interesting question that you bring up, because one thing that I think, and I don't know if it's so much the case now, but I heard about it a lot more when I first started in Willington, was that a lot of people were really, really focused on finding any housing of any kind that was in Willington that they could rent while their house was not livable, because they want to keep their kids in the school. They want to be close to soccer and everything else. And so that, I think, increases some of the demand on the rental markets, because you have families that have two incomes and two kids potentially looking for apartments that normally might be a single person or a student.
So Mike, how many houses are under repair at any given time in town? A dozen?
It depends. I think I did a report not too long ago. So what happens, I believe, is once they are identified and that process begins, they get a really steep reduction in their assessment. I think it's like 90%, and they move out. They get the permit, they start working through the process. The town, Willington, we waive, all the extra application fees and blah, blah, blah. And then when the property gets back onto, CO, they go back to the full assessment.
So that's really not affordable housing. That's just, it's the value drop because of the damage. And as soon as it's fixed, it's right back up to where it should be.
Right. So
affordable housing to me, like if you're talking single family, would be like a CHFA type mortgage on an older home, like similar to the little places on Schofield or something. The capes and the ranches and things like some of the duplexes. Yeah.
So, and again, there's all different ways that you can get to affordable housing. It could be tax incentives, the federal, state, local level. It doesn't necessarily even equate to the construction cost. It really is related to, if there's a deed restriction, either through the mortgage, as you said, CHFA. But just to close the loop on your question, from 2018, excuse me, to about mid 2021, the town issued about 45 permits for concrete replacement, foundation replacements. And majority of those have been completed. At the time, we had about 10 to 15 that were active. But yeah, they don't really relate, but I think they do create an increased demand on the rental market in this area.
Yeah, I think a lot of people look at Willington and they see like quite a few apartment houses that have been here for years, the multi-unit ones, particularly catering to students, and some of them aren't, like Deer Run and like some of the ones up toward Ashford. But
Yeah.
there's other ways to get there just besides that sort of thing, though.
Rachel and I were talking about this morning and getting ready for some of the stuff that we were going to talk about. And I asked her how many units in Willington are essentially not single family. So that could be attached, it could be apartment, it could be, above anything that's not single family detached. And it's roughly 950 units.
Yeah, there's a lot here.
And
I
I
said for
said,
a long time.
I
Some of
didn't
the older ones,
believe her.
Woodhaven, Walden, they've been here forever.
Yeah, Walden. I lived in Walden in the 70s.
Yeah, my brother did. I lived in Woodhaven my last semester at
Yep.
UConn in the 80s.
Yep.
Yeah. So, we have about 2,800 housing units in Willington total, and just under 1,000 of them are not single family detached. It's just really kind of amazing that so many units of Willington's compilation don't come from single family housing stock.
Well, then you have
It's just-
condominiums here and so forth.
Yep. It was just it's extremely high number. Willington also has a fairly high number of affordable units, but when you look at just the makeup of what's here for such a small town, and so many of these projects are nestled into the woods that you wouldn't even know. But I think that's perhaps a good segue into the next piece, which is the POCD stuff. So I don't know, Rachel, do you want to just kind of explain what you did? And
yeah, so part of our regulatory review is also looking at the plan of conservation and development. And for Willington, that's its 2018 plan of conservation development. So looking at any goals that plan outlined for residential development, and reflecting on those goals, the wording of them, and what they've actually looked like in practice, and maybe how we could incorporate them into the housing plan. So the overarching goal laid out in the residential development section of Willington's plan is to provide for a range of housing opportunities for existing and future residents, and a variety of development patterns appropriate for that area of the community. So it's a pretty big goal. I'm going to end sharing this so I can share my document instead, actually. Okay. Do you see that? Okay. So this is how we break it down. We look at the policy or goal in one column, the significance in the middle column, and then our general observations in the third column. So just to begin, first policy goal is to adopt a residential density regulation to limit the number of residential lots in proportion to the amount of buildable land, regardless of development design. So as we know, a huge portion of Willington's land is dedicated to residential uses. So this is a significant goal because the town wants to concentrate residential use in areas that can support housing, that the town wants to support housing, more importantly. And this is also a good way to curb residential sprawl by making sure development is occurring in the places that you want it to occur in. And through our observation, we said that to promote more diverse uses on buildable land, per this goal, changes can be made to the existing housing stock to promote affordability. It doesn't necessarily have to lie in acquiring a bunch of new land and building something new. We can make changes to existing stock through those residential density regulations. The second goal we looked at was consider allowing for higher density housing and or mixed use development in village areas consistent with soil types, terrain, infrastructure capacity, and Willington's vision for the future. So the significance of this one is that we're concentrating housing opportunities within the village centers to improve livability and just generally support the business environment in town as well. This goal definitely works with the other goals quite a bit. Willington does and can likely better concentrate development in village centers that can support the increased traffic and benefit from a denser population in general. And one way Willington is doing this is the ongoing work with the South Willington Village District, working to increase denser residential development in village areas. The next area we looked at was discourage or prohibit higher density housing and or mixed use development outside of village areas. So just as we can restrict the development that occurs within the village area, Willington wants to restrict it outside as well, as to concentrate housing opportunity in the village area and not outside of it. We observed that this is a good strategy for Willing to keep up, especially as the town continues with the South Willington Village District and the work occurring there. It might be a bit much to outright prohibit the denser housing development outside of village areas because it could restrict the town later down the line, but it's just something to think about. The next section, Willington will encourage ways to allow for a wide range of housing choices for the growing number of older households who want to stay in Willington and who seek housing with lower maintenance demands and offer other amenities. So as we know from the front end and looking at the POCD in general and Willington's demographics, there's a substantial elderly population and an age group that will be aging into the elderly population in the coming years. And this is consistent with trends in Connecticut as well. So preparing to accommodate for those needs is really important. Willington has made really good efforts in this area with establishing the designed elderly residential zone. But that does require a zone change, and there aren't any areas of Willington that are currently developable under the zone. Next, the town will also consider allowing accessory apartments to be occupied by caregivers and caretakers in addition to family members. This is significant because ADUs are a really good way to kind of support affordable housing in a more low impact way. It's not so obvious on a street view that you have your in-laws living above your garage or.
How does the state count those in terms of your total percent of affordable housing stock?
So if you have a single family home and you add an accessory dwelling unit, the accessory dwelling unit doesn't take us further away from our 10% goal. So the recent legislation basically says that if they're added, they're not counted towards additional housing units to move us backwards from 10%. But if you were to deed restrict it, then it would count towards the 10%. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the accessory units are a good way to relieve cost burden in that effect. And it can definitely aid in like an elderly living situation and would support the town goal to improve in that area. So this goal also makes strides towards diversifying housing opportunities for older residents or those who want to age in place. The next goal is consider other housing choices appropriate for modest income persons and households. This is significant to Willington because the town does have a great diversity of housing types with a lot of multifamily as well as single family housing types for people of modest incomes to choose between. But we did observe that consider is kind of a weak word to use here, and it doesn't really commit the town to anything specific in this area. Those with modest incomes still require housing like within their budget, and that their group having appropriate housing types can like relieve pressure off other housing types in the market as well. That could be something that we look to in the affordable housing plan as well. Lastly, Willington will evaluate the ways to enhance utility of existing housing stock via reviewing minimum floor area requirements for residential dwelling and consider alternative approaches. This is significant because minimum floor areas allow you to develop properties less expensively. Smaller properties, they can make the area a little bit more dense, and they can potentially fall into the affordable category as well. For Willington, single family, two family, and multifamily dwellings in DCR zones all have the same minimum livable floor area per unit. So distinctions could be made between the three potentially, or reduce all three. And that is it for the Plan of Conservation Development Review. Anyone has reactions?
I would agree that consider is kind of a weak word and it popped up a couple of times. Is there a way to use something else that kind of commits us a little harder to accomplishing the goals?
Yeah, I think in like our affordable housing plan, we're gonna hopefully commit to actual goals, like lay it out, like who's tasked with leading the goal and spearheading its completion. I think we do a good job of holding feet to fire in that sense.
The other thing that I would say, and we've talked about some of this, and as she explained, we've made progress on some of these things. But you know, the one key takeaway is that when you're dealing with residential development, and in a town like Willington, when that is the focus of the development that we have, you have two options. You can take the areas that are developed and you can change the regulations to allow the infill of housing within those areas, or you can basically keep or change the zoning setup so that people have to continue to find more land. You got to go farther and farther, right? I mean, I'm not the dramatic, what you hear, you know, big terms is sprawl, right? And it's this idea that if you're going to require 90,000 or 80,000 square feet of area for a single family home, they've got to keep finding that next 2 acres. So if you look at ways to allow for some infill, you can continue to allow people to move in and build, you know, new houses or whatever, without having to chew up more land, which is getting to one of the goals or one of the suggestions that are kind of higher up in the table here, is that they wanted to look at how can we do basically a build out and figure out, okay, what are the total units of where we think we ought to be, and how can we get those situated in such a way so that we don't just develop every square inch of area zoned residential. We can get the same number of units. And I think that's an important way to do that. It all boils down to focusing growth in the right areas. And so the last step of this plan will be an implementation table, as Rachel mentioned, which is, here's the issue, here's what you need to do about it, and here is the board or the person that can actually get that ball rolling.
Is there any consideration at all of like allowing like smaller lots with smaller single family homes like you'd see like in Manchester, some of the other places, or in some of the older, you know, areas that were originally done here in town?
Yeah,
that's-
definitely. Oh, go ahead.
no, go for it.
Definitely like considering reducing the minimum lot size, minimum floor areas. Those are like pretty common tools that a lot of similar towns will implement in the affordable housing plans as well.
So to align with what this is saying, we know the legislature, we're all going to be moving away, we're going to be moving into accessory dwelling units, not requiring hearings and et cetera, minimum floor areas being removed. The one thing that we know we can do, the courts have said is possible, is you can cap house size. So, we're going to move in a direction of not telling people you've got to build a house that's a minimum of 1,200 square feet. But we can tell them that if, in certain areas of town, maybe we come up with something that allows smaller lot sizes and we cap the size of the house. So it can't be any bigger than 1,200 or 1,400 or whatever. You can absolutely set that ceiling. And that's a way to make sure that if you're going to allow for a smaller lot size, you make sure they build a house that makes sense on that lot.
Well, if you don't have like rules like that, you have like what happened pre-zoning. You'll have like something that doesn't fit in with the rest.
Yeah. And one of the things that's interesting is if you look, South Willington is an example, not a phenomenal one, but these village areas are typically, some of them, the older parts of town, or more, and if they're more densely settled, they have smaller lot sizes, so they can't in many cases facilitate this increased density because they need septic, and you can't put 6 or 8 units on a parcel, even potentially a couple of acres, unless you've got a good soils and septic. So the idea of putting them there is great, but if the sizes of the lots don't support it, it's a really big challenge. So let me go through a couple of things. I have a table here, but it's a little bit busy, so I'm going to just talk through it and then I can share it if you think it's important. So the next piece is the regulatory analysis, which is looking at the zoning regulations. So there were a couple of key components or topics which align with what Rachel has gone through. So we look at residential densities, senior housing, accessory dwelling units, and multifamily. So as we've basically talked about, we have a lot of regulations on the books now which say, minimum floor area of a single family home has to be 1,000 square feet. You can't get an in-law apartment allowed as of right. And we've got a minimum lot size, which is basically was just set, right? It's not reflective of anything other than the intent of the commission, because there are areas of town which septic would be supportive on lots much, much smaller than that. So our regulations are encouraging people to take bigger lots and chop them up into smaller lots and just keep going through and finding that next big parcel. And so if we want to move away from that, we need to look at some of those densities. The other thing that we looked at were, as Rachel mentioned, the accessory dwelling units. So we already know that we want to move in the direction of being responsive to legislation and that they be allowed as of right. But the other thing that we can do is we can dial back on some of the requirements or design criteria. We basically call them in-law apartments now. And so we're going to be having to flip some of that language to be less restrictive as to who lives there. You see sometimes folks go down from 2 incomes to 1 and they want to stay in their house, stay in the school district, stay in the area, but their mortgage is expensive. And this is a way to kind of make that more viable.
So if you want to rent it to college kids or something like that, it'd be allowed.
So the important distinction there is that you don't need to allow them to build a 3-bedroom accessory apartment. You can tell them that it's 1 bedroom. And so based on that, the bedroom would limit the occupancy. right? If you have a 1-bedroom accessory apartment that's 800 square feet, because or less, because again, we can cap the size. If they wanted to live in the house and rent the 1-bedroom apartment to a college student, yes, the new guidance is that as long as the owner lives in one of the units, they're okay. And I know that particularly for towns like Willington, Mansfield, Ashford, Coventry, there's an additional layer of concern because we obviously have Yukon and you don't want that to get out of hand. But the
So
idea
what's to
is
stop them from renting the whole place to college kids like has happened here with some of the single family houses?
because to get credit for the accessory dwelling unit, they have to occupy they either have to occupy the main house or the accessory dwelling unit. They can't rent both out to unrelated parties.
And how do you prove any of it though at the end? You know, say they have their address there and they just do as they please, like has happened here.
Yeah. I mean, there are ways to look at it. Certainly, when you move to a certain location, you have to register your vehicle there. It goes on the grand list. You know, they can be a registered voter in that place. I mean, there are things that we can look at. But it is not the easiest thing to manage or enforce. Absolutely.
It's basically unenforceable, you know, with the amount of enforcement we have. So let's be honest with that.
Yeah, no, it's not even specific to Willington. This idea of family and what constitutes a family. And if you have 3 college kids that are living in a single family home and they're not related, they're just, you know, roommates, are they a family or are they not? I mean, it's something that every town is struggling with right now. And you know, we haven't had any real legal guidance on it, but you know, we've had some complaints in the past and we've you know, worked with the health department to verify, you know, you can't have 100 people in the house because the septic system is designed for a number of bedrooms. You know, so there are some other things that we can do, but short of a rental registration ordinance like Mansfield has, you're correct. It's very, very hard to totally enforce that. So the third category is multifamily. One of the things we've talked about is that Willington has almost 1,000 units of multifamily, but we don't have any proactive area. We don't have any areas in town which are proactively zoned for multifamily. So the existing properties, you know, a chunk of them are zoned multifamily to kind of land on top of the house, the units that were built. But we don't have any areas of town that are zoned, you know, for design community residential or something where we're saying this is an area where we think these types of units should be allowed, sort of advertising that we think that's appropriate. So someone would have to find property, go through the zone change process, be able to prove to you guys that that made sense and was supported by the POCD. So, you know, that coupled with the fact that the density of the existing developments in town now would never be allowed, really have created a situation where everything that we have is in one way, shape, or form non-conforming. So the regs wouldn't support, you know, we've had a couple of units call me or developments and say, can we talk about us building another phase? You know, can we put on another 10 units or can we do this or that? And the regs don't provide for it. It's a non-conforming use. So they can't do it. And that certainly creates a challenge. So looking at how we can support smaller scale, because if you think back to the survey, the results were moderately supportive of small scale multifamily. You know, that's something that we can look to figure out how we do that without getting these really dense, large scale developments. And the last is senior housing. You know, we have Button Hill, it's full. We have a zone that is created and supportive of that, but that's it. Again, we don't have any areas in town which are designed or which are zoned for designed elderly residential. You know, it's not really something that we are saying we're set up and ready to accept these types of uses. So I think that, you know, one of the takeaways that we're going to probably have to do for homework as this commission is taking some of those implementation or POCD goals and really figuring out how we can be in a position to decide if, you know, I guess one, we'd have to decide if we're willing to consider expansion of what we already have, and two, if there are areas and where they are that can support more of what we have. And so I have this, you know, we pulled it together in a table. So I'm working on creating a section of the website which we can post all this stuff so everybody can follow along and see it, and we'll share it all with you. And, you know, be happy to have another follow up at the next meeting if you guys want to have time to review it and talk again.
Yeah, that'd be a good idea to put it on the agenda of the next meeting.
So we'll pull all this together, we'll get it online, and then we will send it all out so that you guys, if you have any comments or questions, we can talk about that at the next meeting.
Also,
No
is there
problem.
any way to keep the survey open so we can possibly get more than 89 responses?
I think it's still open. I don't think
Yeah.
I've closed it. So
We did.
Do Hall and Center schools still have that like student packages they sent home? I think they went to digital, but if they still have that, could that link be added to those packets?
Yep, we've done that in the past in other towns. We leverage the what we had on the town side, and like I said, Facebook, website, social media. But I will check in with Phil tomorrow and see if we can do a blast through the, what'd you call them, Doug?
My kids are already through school, but I think it was like called the digital backpack or something like that.
Yes, that's what it was.
Yeah. Okay. And then just another observation. So, you know, you're trying to define what affordable housing is per month, right? So I went through like backwards and basically said, okay, so if I have a septic system, I have to put in a well and a small amount for land and amortize that, what the payment would be for a 30-year mortgage, that comes out to be like $400 a month. And I haven't done any construction. And then you add a small amount for taxes and insurance, and you're up to $800 a month, and you haven't built the house yet. So I guess maybe keep that in mind, because we're a town that doesn't have a water supply or sewage. It's going to make this much more challenging.
Yeah, one of the things that a lot of towns consider, some towns have done, is to adopt basically an inclusionary zoning requirement where they, you know, if you build any type of housing in excess of, you know, a certain number of units, you have to provide affordable units, or you have to pay a fee. Tallinn just adopted this. It's actually creating a little bit of contention, but the PZC adopted it, and they require $50,000 payment to the town if you build 10 units of housing and you don't have your 10% of that being deed restricted as affordable. You write a check to the town, $50,000 a unit. The town puts that in a fund, which then they use to further create the units, and that could be renovating and making more viable existing affordable housing units. It can be writing a check to a landlord and basically saying, if, you know, over the next 40 years, you're going to lose this much in rent. So we're going to give you a check for a portion of that. In exchange, we're going to basically buy that deed restriction from you. You know, some towns have the surcharge on every single permit that comes into the building department, and they put that into a fund, and, you know, they do it that way because you're right. The math does not work in many cases.
So looking at the median income in Willington, what's an affordable rent here per month?
Rachel, do we have that math? I thought we can do
yes,
it.
I do have that somewhere that I can pull up in just a sec.
So in the way you do it is you look at the department. Well, it's online. Federal government establishes these rates based on locale. So it's you take the 80% area median income, and then the deed restriction cannot be more than 30% of that 80%. I thought we did the math. Let me see if I can pull it up.
I just have to like dig around in my files for a second.
I thought on the presentation that we had, we might have done it. I know we did the math last time. Affordable housing plan. Housing plan, grant application. Survey flyer. Demographics. Let me try this. Is it on our presentation from last time? 2,800 units, housing stock affordability, median rent. I did the median info. Well, while Rachel's looking at that, does anybody else have any other questions or any thoughts, takeaways for the time being?
I'm good. I appreciate the work you guys have done on this so far. It just, it's gonna have, what we do here has to be done right and be well thought out.
Yeah, no, for sure. But I will absolutely follow up with the school to see if we can get this blasted out.
Yeah, it would be great to see, like, I'd feel a lot better if there were 500 responses rather than 89. It gives you a much better cross section of how people feel.
Yeah. So let's see, 80%.
I got a medium income of 76.9 with a quick Google search.
Yeah, so it's a little dependent on the size of the household. So it fluctuates a little bit depending on what HUD has for household size.
Okay.
So I'm trying to find the actual HUD table they just did for 2021. So we would be Tolland County, Litchfield, Wyndham, Hartford, West Hartford, East Hartford. I can't pull it up.
Sorry, I had to connect to my VPN because
We can do this the next meeting. We can just
I can
bring it up.
also follow up. Yeah, I can follow up
Yep.
and then we can show it at the next
That way
meeting,
you
too.
do it properly rather than trying to rush.
Exactly. I want to give you the real deal. So
I think it
Thank
was
you.
when we did it last time, it was less than 1,400 or 1,500, I think.
Yeah, 1,500 doesn't sound like a very affordable apartment, does it?
No,
No.
not when you talk about water, septic, and a little piece of land, taxes and insurance eating up
Yep.
half that. It just, and as the interest rates go up, how does that impact those numbers?
They are going to go up. It's going to be more
Yeah, they are.
expensive to get these loans.
Yeah.
So it's tied. So the one issue that a lot of the reason why a lot of developers don't want to build these units, beyond the fact that they rather stick it with market rate, is that every year the tenants of these units have to be income verified. So every year they're going to look at what's the area median income in Willington. Okay, so then we're going to do that math and figure out for the household and based on the costs, what the total cost of that unit can be per month. And then they need to verify the income of that person in there. If they make more money, they get a bump in pay or whatever, and they don't qualify, they have to leave.
So if you succeed, you get kicked out of your house.
Right, because exactly. And so developers really, beyond anything else, don't want to be involved in having to pay someone to vet those units every year. The deed restriction will track forever, but what do you do if someone's been in there for 3 years and they've been able to get themselves on an established job and they're working and they get a bump in pay? Now they have to, $100 extra a month could bump them out of that unit, and now they're going market rate, which could be $200 to $400 a month or more. So there's this hole that they fall into, and it creates an issue because people don't have the incentive to get a better paying job because they're worried they can't afford a market rate apartment. So
Yeah,
it creates this.
that's not a great plan.
It definitely creates a lot of concern amongst folks because they are worried they're going to be kicked out of their unit. And there's the income limited units, the deed restricted, are done for 40 years. They know there's a dependency in what that unit's going to cost every year. When they go to market rate, they're going to be paying whatever their landlord is going to charge them for that year based on what, the market and COVID and everything else is saying that they can demand. It is a bit of a conundrum for sure. So we'll follow up. We'll do a, Rachel, why don't we do, for the website, we can just do a 1-page slide, pull it from the slide deck of basically area median income, basically showing the math. What's area median income, 80% for a household. Maybe we can do it a family of 2 and a family of 5. And I can ship all that out and we'll get it on the website so people can review it.
Yeah, that works.
All right. And then we can have a follow-up discussion the next meeting. Does that work for everybody?
Yes.
Sure.
Works for me. I don't know about everybody else.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. We'll make sure we use the 2022 numbers if they have them. All right.
All right. Well, I appreciate the work you guys have done on this so far.
Yeah. Hopefully next time we see you, we have a lot more responses of the survey.
Right. Unfinished business, special development district regulations, and got those in front of me.
Yeah. So hopefully everybody got emailed the draft PDF. And Becky, your section there, hopefully we talked about at the last meeting related to fire suppression. You saw that I had added that in there. So if anybody has questions, we can go through it. The goal.
I have one question real quick. On page 2, the PCD may be applied within areas designated as Route 5 corridor. It sounds like we're talking about East Windsor or something.
Yeah.
Industrial corridor, Northern Business Corridor.
I cannibalized a couple of other things that I had written.
Okay.
So I will tweak that section.
You answered some of the questions got answered when we had our other discussion, like in terms of the village district. Is the vision in that village district, would it be to have like shops underneath and apartments above, like something like that?
The reg does currently support that, but it's small scale. So you couldn't do an 8-unit.
Not like at UConn, like at downtown Disney there.
No.
Yeah.
That it caps out at 4 or 6 units. Everything else is the reg doesn't even envision it. So that what you outlined is possible.
So typically that kind of apartment, those pretty high priced in a district like that. So is that a stretch to call something like that possibly affordable?
For the stuff in South Willington or the stuff in Mansfield?
No, well, I know the ones in Mansfield aren't.
Yeah. If it's deed restricted and they're willing to deed restrict it, then it would be considered affordable. But other than that, it would be market rate, which is generally higher.
Yeah, that's just I just have a hard time imagining a developer putting something up and limiting the amount of money they can make on it and spending all that and developing that area. I don't know.
Well, the other component to this is that under 8-30G, any town that doesn't have 10% or more of its housing stock as deed restricted affordable, an affordable housing project is exempt from having to meet zoning. So if our regulations say your max yield on a 10-acre site is 20 units, and he can meet fire and health and building codes with 60 units, he can build 60. So the point to that is to basically put them in a position where if they acquire a piece of land and the pro forma that Doug outlined, the math says this does not work, our cost per unit is going to be this. We got to get 40 units on here. The town only allows 20. If they deed restrict it, they can build 40. That's the one carrot that the law provides.
You still gotta have water, you still gotta have sewer, you still gotta, you can't like build on wetlands, you can't.
Right. Yep. Those things, water, health requirements, public safety requirements, building code requirements, all of those things all still apply, but density caps, setbacks, lot coverage, building height, parking requirements, everything in the zoning book can go right out the window if they're building affordable per state statute. So I will change the eligibility requirements to just be reflective of the areas that are in the POCD. Does anybody else have any other suggested changes or questions? And again, this is preliminary, so this has got to go to CROG to be, I've got to refer it to CROG, and then we'll set a public hearing. You can make amendments, during the hearing. So this is not, you're not doing any real approving. You're just deciding if you're comfortable with me sending this for comment to CROG and setting a public hearing for probably the first meeting in March.
All right, I don't have any further questions on it. Anyone else? Take it as a no.
I talk too much about affordable housing. Everybody wants me to stop, I think.
This
All
looks
right.
good to me, Mike.
So if you're comfortable, I guess a motion to send this for official comment to CROG would be in order.
I'll make a motion to send this for official comment to CROG.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, approval of minutes, January 4th, 2022.
I didn't see the minutes in the package. They're there.
They were sent out a week ago or so,
Oh,
last week, I believe. Has anyone else not taken a look?
We can push it out if you guys are more comfortable.
Yeah, if we don't have everybody looking, and we should.
Okay,
We'll put it on next agenda.
okay. That works. They're
Any
filed,
cor-
so we're good.
Yeah, any correspondence?
Nothing other, I know that at the last meeting, I sent to you guys the commissioner training stuff. So unless anybody has questions on that, we have nothing new.
Yeah, you haven't sent that yet. I haven't seen it.
The OPM stuff?
Just as far as classes coming up or whatever?
Yeah, so there's, nothing has been identified yet,
Okay,
as far as being whatever, but I will be, well, one of the things that I'm recommending, we'll do it for ZBA wetlands, and if you guys agree, you know, we're gonna be making sure that the training budgets are reflective of that, so that we have money in the PZC line, so that if you guys want to go to trainings, we can provide that.
well, it's going to be required as of 2023.
Yep.
All
So-
right. So we should start building the budget now.
Yep. So, yeah, I have some ideas as to what I think rough costs are probably going to be, so we can probably get a pretty good number pulled together.
Okay, good.
Let's go somewhere nice.
There we go. I say Hawaii. What do you think, Doug?
I'll second that, Walter.
As long as there's no COVID, good to go.
No, you're gonna have to have all your shots to go to Hawaii. They're
Yep.
just
Gotta
changing.
have your shots away. Yep.
All right, let's see, public comment. Commission will hear brief comments at this time from anyone wishing to speak. No business can be conducted here, nor can any comments be made about any items on the agenda. Do we have any public comment?
I see Ron.
Once again,
Just me. Come on. Well, look at the screen.
okay,
Ralph,
you weren't
Ralph.
up until after you started talking, Ralph. Now I see you. And
Okay.
you look
Sorry.
positively jolly tonight. So what's on your mind?
I'm gonna try to avoid talking about something on the agenda.
Oh, of
Which is-
course, but you can't help yourself, can you?
Well, I could be talking about something on the agenda, but no, that's beside the point. The village district. In considering what we have in South Willington, I think one of the things that the town needs to, or somehow we need to nudge the town towards considering a wastewater treatment system for the area that would enhance the ability of the village district to attract business. One of the toughest restrictions in that area is septic. And if we could somehow get just a small area, the key area of that piece of South Willington onto a municipal water treatment facility, that would allow for a lot more options as to what can be done with all of those existing buildings. Just my,
If we also hooked up houses to it, that would allow us to build on smaller lots.
well, you've got to be careful too, because you've got to pay for it. It is not unusual for a municipality to have a supplemental property tax on for purposes like this. I know in Manchester, they have the 8th Utilities District, and you get a separate tax bill from them if you own property in their district.
I grew up in Bridgeport. You have your sewer bill, you have your water bill, you have your, there's lots of bills come in every month.
The key
Yeah,
thing
so-
though with wastewater treatment is generally you're paying based on your water usage. And if you're not hooked up to a public water supply, how do you measure that? That's the challenge. If it were just a supplemental property tax, it might help to defray the cost of building a system like that. And I think there's undeveloped land available where it would be appropriate to situate something like that, and it could serve the South Willington Village and a limited area around it. I don't know how we
You could
nudge the
also-
town in that direction, but
You could look at it from a perspective of what does the facility cost every year, and make the people who are hooked up to it share those costs.
you have to kind of be careful, because sometimes you're going to be forced to hook up even if you don't want to. It all depends how things are established.
Mhm.
We've had an issue with a municipal or a local water supply, water system that was not designed to be used by everyone on the road, but someone wanted to hook up to it. I think the same can apply to sewer. I know in Manchester, property that I did own there on Tolland Turnpike, I had a failing septic system. And the requirement in Manchester was that since there is public sewer down Tolland Turnpike, I'd be required to hook up to it unless I could get a special exception from the state of Connecticut, which I ultimately did. But, it's a somewhat rural corner of Manchester, and the practicality of hooking up to a municipal sewer system was out of the question because it meant a rail crossing. And that just gets really, really complicated. But nonetheless, that's just an observation that I've had for many, many years with respect to the village. I think it would enhance its value to developers. I just don't know how we get there.
There's been.
You almost have to see some interest in development first.
Yeah, but that becomes a catch-22.
I hear you,
chicken
but
and egg.
you gotta.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of thoughts. I mean, USDA has some loans, but it's pretty much just loans. There is something called a TIF, Tax Increment Finance District, which is basically where the town borrows against future projects and then uses the taxes generated by, town borrows the money, does a bunch of work. That work facilitates growth on the grand list. The taxes generated from the grand list growth then pay back the money that was borrowed through the TIF. The third option, there's been some sort of whispers about it, but we haven't really seen, but the big infrastructure bill that, we're hearing about may include some money related to that. This is probably the fourth time in the last year someone has brought up what Ralph just mentioned. And so it's something to look at. There are a couple of different ways that we get there, but to your point, the hard part is if somebody shows up and says, I want to do a development and I need to get connected to sewer, the town can't move that quickly. And so the project doesn't happen.
Right.
So, but there may be something that we can do. I'm going to look at a few things.
Oh, it would be beneficial to test for COVID in the waste stream.
Okay, well, then maybe we can take, all of the ARPA
COVID
money that
money.
the town got.
I'm sort of kidding, but maybe there's some financial aid in that regard. But I don't think we can spend the money and time anyway, because it's not going to be enough to cover a system.
Yeah, the only other option would be to look to see how close an existing pipe is and trying to find some money to connect.
What, in South Willington?
Well, yeah, you have two options: connect to a pipe that's somewhere down the road or build your own.
I don't know that there is one close down the road.
Yeah, probably not.
Not for septic, but for a water supply, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
Yeah.
the water supply is not too far.
we have water supply right up to Hall School from
Yeah,
Tolland.
But okay, and plus I'm not sure if Connecticut Water Company would be okay with it, but they bumped up the line feeding Yukon. So
No, that's
couple
coming
years
from
ago.
that's coming from a well field, I think, on the other side of the Willamette.
Okay,
And I think they boosted the size of the piping in anticipation of a DER zone down across from near Baxter Road. The house property, the horse property there. On the corner.
Yeah, Connecticut Water actually has an agreement. Connecticut Water operates the line that comes out of Tolland on behalf of Tolland. And there's some public water supply wells. They actually buy water from Tolland. I was trying to get I know I have the interconnection map. It's a 12-inch line that comes out of Tolland, and then it hooks right, and it goes to the school. There's also an 8-inch line that goes down. Oh, I can never remember the name of that street. goes right down by Chase to Village Street.
Well, they bumped up the line that goes all the way through Tolland on 195 a couple years ago.
Yeah,
I think that's bigger than 12. I think that was bigger than 12 inches.
there's a couple of systems in Tolland. There's the town of Tolland system, which is owned by Tolland and operated by Connecticut Water. And then there's the Connecticut Water system, which is sort of separate and distinct. You know, we've had some
Okay.
people ask some questions on that. So I am actually trying to set up a call with Connecticut Water to talk about capacity, because even if we can get that expanded, even if I can't get sewer, if I can take wells off the property, I free up the ability for septic to go elsewhere, because now they're not planning for the radius on a well.
Yeah.
So we're talking about that right now, actually.
I think
I think that line on 195 was put in for Yukon.
yeah, it was, but I
Yeah.
didn't know if there was options to tee off of that, if it was possible. I'm not sure.
I mean, it depends on what volume you're gonna pull off of it. If,
Yeah, I mean, I think Yukon wanted something like 1 million gallons a day or something like that. So they needed to bump up the pipe size, but I'm not sure to where they are as far as capacity goes, what they're using. I don't know.
One of the apartment complexes, which is right on the town line, is connected. It came out of through Mansfield, and they were having some issues with their wells, and so they're now on water. But there was a specific sort of agreement that got to that. But let me look into this a little bit more, and if I come up with anything significant, I will circle back.
all right.
All right, that's all. I'm not going to comment on an agenda item, so
All right. Thank you,
let
Ralph.
it go with that.
Have a good night. All right, staff report and discussion, item A, bond policy.
I just left this here as a bit of a follow-up. I did send it off to the town's attorney to do a review. They had a couple of very minor changes, but one of the things that we talked about is that we are allowing for a letter of credit as a bond type. That's something that has been allowed previously, which is a little bit of a different type of policy versus like a performance bond, where they go to the bank and they pay a monthly premium on something just like a regular insurance policy. There's some sense that a performance bond may be a more reliable format, because the town has much more flexibility in actually being able to obtain that cash. Letter of credit is not a great, there's not a high likelihood that if the town called the bond and there was really a lot going on with the developer, that it would be quick and easy to get that money. So I'm working with Ken and Rich now just to see if we want to actually move away from this letter of credit idea and move into more of a performance bond, so that if something does come up, we can actually access that money more easily. I just wanted to give you a quick update on that. But everything that we had written, they were comfortable with.
Okay. Any news on the enforcement on the complaint on 74, corner 74 there and 32?
Let me do a quick check just to see if we have a date set. Party name.
That place hasn't really improved.
No, absolutely nothing.
I was looking at it the other day. It's like they've not taken this very seriously, obviously.
Yeah. Property last action. Doesn't look like anything was filed on their behalf. So I will follow up with the attorney tomorrow and see if we can get a status check so that I can report back at the next meeting.
Okay, thank you. Anything else from any other commissioner before we adjourn? Okay, it's 8:50 PM, meeting adjourned. Have a good night, everyone.
Night, everyone.